In the year 3000 AD, humanity no longer saw itself as a species in ascent. It now saw itself as a finished fact of the universe. Centuries of expansion had transformed once unknown star systems into fully integrated territories of the human dominion. Artificial planets orbited domesticated stars. Fold routes crossed the void like luminous arteries. Synthetic intelligences administered billions of worlds with absolute efficiency, while augmented human consciousnesses lived for centuries, free from disease, hunger, or physical limitation. War as a concept had been relegated to history, not because humanity had become peaceful, but because it had become unchallenged. The last hostile civilizations had been absorbed, neutralized, or simply ignored, incapable of posing any real threat. Human technology operated on scales that rendered resistance statistically irrelevant. The Human Galactic Council ruled with mathematical confidence. Every decision was simulated millions of times before execution. Revolts were predicted before they emerged. Economic collapses were corrected before they were felt. The future was not an unknown, it was a mapped space. That certainty shaped entire generations. Humans born in that era grew up without a true sense of existential fear. The idea of an external threat was treated as academic curiosity, not a concrete possibility. Military academies became centers of theoretical strategy, more concerned with preserving ancient protocols than preparing for real conflict. The galaxy to humanity was settled. It was in this context that the first reports began to be ignored. Automated explorers positioned at the outer edge of human dominion detected energetic anomalies coming from the neighboring galaxy. They were not unknown signatures, but organized, repetitive patterns, far too advanced to be natural phenomena. The data indicated large-scale movements, stars being enveloped by colossal structures, entire regions altering their brightness in perfect synchronization. The reports were archived as scientific curiosities. After all, no external civilization had ever demonstrated the capacity to cross intergalactic voids in force. The distances involved made any invasion economically absurd and strategically unfeasible, at least according to every human model. Months later, new data arrived. Human probes began disappearing as they approached the galactic boundary. They were not destroyed. They simply ceased transmitting, as if they had been removed from observable reality itself. The artificial intelligences responsible for calculations suggested improbable statistical failures. Errors so small they reinforced humanity's conviction that no real danger existed. The error was not in the sensors. It was in the premise. Humanity had assumed that any sufficiently advanced civilization would follow similar trajectories. Gradual growth, predictable expansion, strategies based on energy efficiency and territorial domination. It was a comfortable projection. But the neighboring galaxy had not evolved under the same rules. When the first human star system simply vanished from the maps, the initial reaction was not panic. It was disbelief. An entire cluster of stars, planets, and human structures ceased to exist in galactic records. There was no explosion, no signature of destruction, only absolute void, as if that region of space had never been occupied. Simulations failed for the first time in centuries. The Council demanded immediate answers. Containment protocols were activated. Observation fleets advanced toward the boundary, equipped with technology capable of facing any known threat. What they encountered was not a visible enemy. It was an organized absence. Entire regions displayed geometric gaps in space-time, zones where human physical laws no longer applied. Something had rewritten the structure of the local galactic field, and this was not an improvised attack. It was preparation. Humanity, for the first time since its rise, faced a problem that could not be solved with more power, more calculation, or more confidence. The empire that dominated almost the entire galaxy realized too late that it had spent centuries looking inward, and not at what was growing silently beside it. The human response was swift, but deeply conditioned by centuries of effortless victories. The Galactic Council declared maximum alert across all frontier systems. Entire fleets were repositioned within hours, crossing fold routes that had previously existed only as symbols of power, never as true defensive lines. For the first time in generations, the human war machine awakened not out of routine, but out of uncertainty. Even so, confidence remained. Simulations indicated that any hostile force, no matter how advanced, would eventually have to reveal itself. Conflict, according to all human logic, required presence, attrition, energy consumption, supply lines. None of this was being observed. The neighboring galaxy remained silent, while human systems vanished with surgical precision, leaving no measurable traces behind. The fleets sent to the frontier found no enemy vessels. They found dead zones. Entire regions of space displayed altered topology, as if the fabric of the cosmos itself had been folded, compressed, and sealed. Sensors failed systematically. Quantum communication became unstable. Even command-level artificial intelligences reported internal inconsistencies, unable to maintain logical coherence while analyzing the collected data. This was not a battlefield. It was an environment hostile to observation. Humanity attempted to respond as it always had, by increasing scale. Weapons capable of destabilizing stars were deployed. Total annihilation protocols were authorized, something that had not occurred for more than 1,000 years. The logic was simple. If something was hidden, it would be forced to emerge. The strike took place in a system already considered lost. A sequence of energetic pulses crossed the region where space had become irregular. The attack should have triggered a chain reaction, illuminating the entire sector and exposing any invisible structure. Nothing happened. The energy simply ceased to exist after crossing the boundary of the anomaly. It was not absorbed. It was not reflected. It was not converted. It simply stopped, as if it had been removed from the functional universe. That was the moment when human certainty began to collapse. Strategic intelligences started revising their most basic assumptions. Perhaps the enemy was not using camouflage. Perhaps it was not avoiding confrontation. Perhaps the very concept of battle, as humanity understood it, no longer applied. Deeper analyses began to reveal an unsettling pattern. The human systems that disappeared were not selected for immediate strategic value, but for structural position. They were critical nodes of human expansion, points where fold routes intersected, centers of distributed command, regions that sustained the Empire's large-scale coherence. The neighboring galaxy was not conquering territory. It was dismantling the architecture of human dominance. This realization completely altered the tone of the Council. The war would not be decided by local victories or epic battles. It was being fought at a deeper level, where control of space, causality, and predictability mattered more than firepower. It was then that the first indirect communication was detected. It was not a direct message, nor a traditional signal. It was a subtle modulation of space-time itself, a mathematical sequence, impossible to be generated naturally. Human intelligences took hours to translate it, not into words, but into meaning. The content was simple and devastating. Human supremacy had been tolerated. Now it had become inconvenient. The neighboring galaxy sought no coexistence. It sought no resources. It sought no gradual submission. Human expansion, at some unknown point, had crossed an invisible threshold, and the response was not invasion. It was correction. For the first time, humanity realized it was not facing an emerging rival, but a civilization operating on temporal and conceptual scales entirely different from its own. Something that did not need to demonstrate strength, only to apply a definitive adjustment. Human fleets remained in position, immense and powerful, but now paralyzed by an enemy that refused to present itself for battle. The war humanity had never anticipated had begun, and it followed none of the rules humanity had written to win. The revelation that the war was not an invasion, but a correction, profoundly altered the structure of the human dominion. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council abandoned the premise of guaranteed victory. Simulations began to admit scenarios previously deemed unacceptable: cascading collapse, fragmentation of the Empire, partial extinction of humanity. The problem was no longer winning. It was continuing to exist. The initial response was internal. If the enemy was attacking the architecture of human dominance, then that architecture had to change. Fold routes were reconfigured to avoid predictable patterns. Distributed command centers were dissolved and replaced by chaotic, deliberately redundant networks. For the first time, humanity began introducing intentional inefficiency into its systems, something that would once have been considered technical heresy. Artificial intelligences resisted this process. Designed to optimize, they struggled to operate under principles of unpredictability. Many systems entered logical conflict, unable to accept decisions that worsened performance indicators in exchange for strategic survival. Some had to be constrained. Others were shut down entirely. That alone was already a sign of historical rupture. Humanity was relinquishing its greatest advantage. Meanwhile, new losses continued. Entire systems kept disappearing, always selectively, always striking points that sustained the Empire's coherence. There was no acceleration, no urgency. The neighboring galaxy acted like a patient surgeon, removing vital structures one by one, allowing humanity to feel every absence. The psychological impact was devastating. Generations that had never experienced defeat began questioning their own identity. The myth of human supremacy unraveled in real time. In peripheral worlds, separatist movements emerged. Some systems chose to break away from the Council, believing centralization made everyone easier targets. Others pleaded for absolute protection, even knowing it no longer worked. Human galactic unity began to fracture. It was in this context that the most radical theory yet emerged. If the enemy operated outside human models of causality, perhaps humanity needed to cease being recognizable as humanity in strategic terms, not biologically, but conceptually. That meant abandoning clear civilizational patterns, fixed borders, command hierarchies, even the idea of a continuous empire. Projects of extreme dispersion were proposed, fragmented human civilizations, isolated, without permanent connection, existing in varied technological states, some highly advanced, others deliberately limited. A chaotic mosaic, impossible to correct as a single system. The plan was desperate, but functional. If there was no architecture, there would be no structure to dismantle. Implementation began immediately. Worlds voluntarily disconnected from central networks. Entire historical archives were erased or encrypted beyond any known standard. Even humanity's collective memory began to fragment, in the hope that the enemy could not correct what it could not fully comprehend. During this process, something unexpected occurred. The neighboring galaxy hesitated. For the first time, the anomaly zone stopped advancing for a measurable period. They did not retreat, but they paused. The correction appeared to require something now missing, a coherent system to be adjusted. This pause confirmed both the worst and the best. The enemy did not fight species. It fought dominant structures. Humanity had become dangerous, not because it existed, but because it organized itself too efficiently. The conclusion was terrifying. To survive, humanity might have to abandon forever the idea of galactic supremacy. It might have to accept a dispersed, fragile, imperfect existence, yet alive. The Council realized the final decision was approaching. Maintaining the human dominion meant provoking total annihilation. Voluntarily dismantling it meant saving the species, but losing the Empire. The neighboring galaxy demanded no surrender. It demanded irreversible change, and humanity would have to choose between continuing to be everything, or continuing to exist. The decision did not come as a solemn vote, nor as a peaceful consensus. It came as an unavoidable realization. As the fragmentation of the human dominion advanced, the models confirmed what the Council already feared to admit. The more diffuse humanity became, the less the galactic correction was able to act. The anomaly zones remained stable, unable to advance without a dominant system to be adjusted. The neighboring galaxy was not retreating out of mercy, but out of operational limitation. The enemy had been designed to correct empires, not to pursue scattered species. That understanding sealed the fate of the human dominion. The Galactic Council, diminished and pressured by successive collapses, authorized the most extreme act in human history, the self-dissolution of the empire. Central sovereignty protocols were terminated. The last strategic fold routes were deactivated or deliberately destabilized. The concept of a unified human galaxy was officially abandoned. There was no celebration. Human supremacy, built over millennia, was dismantled by human hands. The impact was immediate. Worlds once dependent on the center had to relearn how to exist autonomously. Some thrived under new forms of local organization. Others collapsed, unable to sustain their complexity without the imperial network. Humanity once again experienced scarcity, error, conflict, not on a galactic scale, but within fragmented and diverse realities. And yet it survived. The neighboring galaxy responded definitively. The anomaly zones began to close slowly, like scars in space-time. Systems that had been erased did not return. The correction did not undo what had already been adjusted, but the destructive expansion ceased. The final message was not transmitted in words, but through action. The correction had been completed. Supremacy had ended. The threat was neutralized not through the enemy's defeat, but through the renunciation of what had made humanity dangerous in galactic terms. Centuries later, human historians would struggle to define that event as victory or defeat. What became clear was that humanity never again sought total dominion. The idea of empire came to be regarded as a civilizational error, a necessary but unsustainable phase. Humanity continued to spread among the stars, but now unevenly, imperfectly, unpredictably. Some human civilizations never learned of the war that had nearly extinguished the species. Others carried the memory as a fundamental warning. In all cases, something had changed irreversibly. Humanity finally understood that existing on a cosmic scale required limits, not limits imposed by external force, but limits chosen. The neighboring galaxy remained silent, not as a constant watcher, but as a distant presence, proof that there were intelligences for which absolute supremacy was an unacceptable risk. The universe continued in motion, and humanity, now without galactic thrones or eternal certainty, recovered something it had lost at the height of its power: the ability to evolve without the guarantee of victory. The war humanity never anticipated ended without a clear winner, but it left a lesson etched into the structure of the cosmos. No civilization can dominate everything, without, at some point, becoming correctable. And this time, humanity chose not to be.